Good afternoon, everybody. We are very happy to have you with us here this afternoon. Today we'll be touching on accommodations and concessions. So what is an accommodation, concession, or an exemption? An accommodation or concession is when a change or modification is made to the assessment or the regulations of the assessment. Applying for an accommodation or concession can help support the learner who experience learning barriers without compromising the standard or the credibility of the assessment. An exemption is typically used when FET learner cannot take a subject that is required to complete the NSC, and then they may take a different subject in its place. We will be touching on who qualifies for accommodations, concessions, and exemptions. This would be your learners with learning barriers or disabilities. Immigrant learners, these are typically a child or dependent of a diplomatic representative of a foreign government that is recognized in our country. A child who first enrolled in South Africa in a school in grade 7 or later, or a child who started their schooling in South Africa but left the country for 2 or more years, and then after grade 3, and then has since returned to the country. We may also have ad hoc accommodations. Those are for learners who need an emergency accommodation in case of an injury, trauma, hospitalization, pregnancy, imprisonment, and that would take place during the assessments or just before the exams. The types of accommodations, concessions, and exemptions that are available for our learners. We have additional time. That is when time is added at the end of the exam paper for the learner that qualifies for this concession. A prompter, that would be typically somebody who's sent into the exam center with the learner to prompt them to write the exams at time and to be present. A reader would be somebody who reads the exam papers for the learner, not explains, but reads the paper as it's presented to the learner. We have rest breaks. We have a separate venue or special placement for learners where a learner could be in a different room altogether or placed in a different section of the exam room. We have scribes. We have medication or food intake. We have a spelling concessions where spelling is not accounted for, where the learner needs such an accommodation. And we have enlarged print or then exemption from a language, as I've touched on before. When should you consider an accommodation or concession? When a learner is experiencing learning barriers such as mental illness, attention disorders such as ADD or ADHD, when a learner has reading difficulties or writing difficulties such as dyslexia, when there's physical disabilities, chronic illness, or trauma that is mostly associated with PTSD. How does the application process work with Impaq? So when you feel that your learner is in need of an accommodation or exemption, please do send us an email. The email will be then reverted to our AQC department, who will then send you the necessary forms and the process. You will then gather all the evaluation from different doctors and specialists, and then you will submit these documents to Impaq. We will then do the checks, and then we will submit these documents to a committee. In grade 4 to 9, the process is mostly run internal, where the committee meeting would be the Impaq committee. The committee will then sit. We have an educational psychologist that is on the panel. We will evaluate the application and then reach a decision. We will then send feedback within 2 to 4 days. And then once you've received your feedback, you can then appeal within 1 calendar month. And then in FET, the process is slightly different. Once the Impaq committee meeting has set, we send these applications to Sakai, where their committee meeting also deliberates on these applications. This process takes a bit longer as Sakai has the final decision. It takes around 4 to 6 weeks. Once we then get feedback from Sakai, we will then send you the feedback. And again, once you've received the feedback, you can then appeal within 1 calendar month. These are the submission dates and deadlines associated with the concessions. For grade 4 to 9, we have it here on our screen. You will see that the cutoff date for grade 4 to 9 is the 20th of September for all learning barrier and immigrant concessions. And then for grade 10 to 12, you can send us an email and we'll make the details available for you. But it is just important to note that the closing dates for FET is for grade 10 and 11, we'll be closing these applications on the 31st of May, and for grade 12 on the 5th of April. So it is best to apply as soon as possible. Important information to note in the application process is that the requirements for 4 to 9 and grade 10 to 12 learners are different. As I've said before, the FET applications are all referred to Sakai, and Sakai has the final say and decision on these applications. All application forms can be requested from AQC that's supported impaq.co.za, and some of the forms are already uploaded on OLP. For these applications, various supporting documents are required. You will need specialist letters, you will need letters from medical and psychologists. But Sakai has noted to us that the most important document to present in these applications would be a report from an educational psychologist. It's also very important to note that all reports should not be older than 2 years. So the newer the report, the better they can deliberate on these applications. About the process, the average processing time for application is between 6 and 8 weeks. Applications will not be accepted if they're incomplete or submitted after the deadline. It's very important to note that only the legal guardian or the account holder can apply for a learner. FET applications are subject to approval by Sakai, as I've said before. And then all accommodations, concessions, and exemptions costs are for the parent or the guardian's account. And this includes read or scribe, a separate venue, an additional invigilator, or the additional time for invigilator. Same with the final exams. All the costs are for the parent and the guardian. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Lebu. I'm pretty sure that throughout this, the remainder of this webinar, I am still going to call on you to assist with a couple of questions. We always get the question from parents, if my child not necessarily fits into a particular mold, if I need a completely alternative option, what are the options that I can look at? And each child is very unique. So the options that I will be discussing this afternoon is around a very particular need that you may have. The one, there's no one fit for a particular child. So we advise on options that you may consider, things that you can keep in mind. One of the options that a parent has is to register for individual subjects. And some of the examples that we've heard from over the years are instances where parents know that my child will not necessarily be able to obtain any form of qualification. But it is important for me to do languages with my child, or it might be important for me to do mathematics with my child. And in those instances, parents opt to register for an individual subject. We see this often where parents do some kind of an eclectic approach with their special needs child, and they know that their child might also be on different levels when it comes to something like mathematics versus the languages, for example, where they have an affinity for a particular subject, but they just cannot manage another subject. So this is something that we do often see with some of our learners, where parents then only register for a particular subject This obviously within a CAP scope will not provide the learner with a pass report card to be promoted to the next grade or even to the next phase. But we see parents choosing this where they have just a particular need for their child, or they might be following a completely different curriculum that is suitable to their child's needs, but they would like to follow the CAPS curriculum in terms of a subject offered through CAPS. You can also, and we see this very often in our FET phase, grade 10 to 12, for learners with anxiety or learners that just really have found it very difficult to cope with the full set of 7 subjects in their grade 10, 11, and 12 years, where they split that year over more than one calendar year. We also see this not just with learners that have some kind of learning barrier, even though that is our focus for the evening, but we often see this with learners who participate in sport on a national level or even international level where they just cannot cope with all of the subjects in a particular year. That's a completely different scenario. But where a child has anxiety specifically, and that is perhaps one of the issues that we deal with mostly, they will take 3 subjects in the first year and 4 in the second year, or perhaps 4 subjects in the first year and 3 in the second year. In an instance like that, and specifically focusing on grade 10 to 12 for that option, they will not receive a statement of results at the end of the year that indicates a pass report card. But once they've completed all of their subjects in grade 10, for grade 10, for example, we do keep that in mind and then look at those subjects to determine whether the learner can be progressed to grade 11. Similarly, we do the same thing for grade 11 to pass or to progress into grade 12. If a learner completes grade 12 over a period of 2 years or even more years, then at the end of each year, the learner receives the statement of results and then can apply through Sakai to have the statements of results combined into a single national senior certificate. This is definitely an option to consider for our grade 10 to 12 learners. Impaq does not offer an ALSEN curriculum. It is not a special needs curriculum. Impaq's products and services are CAPS aligned. Therefore, we are in line with what the minimum requirements are for the national curriculum. So this is also for those parents well versed in the Schools Act or even the Policy on Home Education. This is in line with what the Policy on Home Education does provide for, that parents need to do at least a curriculum that is on par with what would happen in a public school, and therefore our curriculum is in line with CAPS. But again, learners are unique, and learners with unique learning abilities might not be able to follow the CAPS curriculum that is extremely packed to a T. So our learning delivery team always advise parents to first consider what is it that you would like to achieve with your learner, or what is it that your learner can achieve. That would be your starting point. And this refers a bit back to what I started off with saying, where some learners only will complete an individual subject, for example, where the outcome is not necessarily a matric certificate or even a grade 9 school leaver certificate. It might just be a case of a learner with very severe disabilities or very severe learning disabilities where they need to just do a particular subject, and you really just want them to become proficient in reading perhaps and languages perhaps, then that would be a suitable option. So it's always important to keep in mind, what is it that I want to achieve with my learner? We deal with a lot of learners where the achievement that the parents want for their child, or where the child specifically wants a particular achievement, is at least just a grade 9. They want to have that school leaver certificate. And in that instance, parents can also extend the subjects, do the subjects over more years, allow that child to complete all of the subjects to at least at the end of grade 9 have completed everything that they need to complete in line with CAPS. it's always important to think about your child's strengths and interests when making this decision. Also, when you look at your child's academic journey, then something such as home education does provide for flexibility. And we often hear of learners who could not cope in a mainstream school due to them being somewhere on the spectrum or with severe ADHD or ADD, and they just can't cope in a classroom with 40, 50 other kids. And the moment that they're in a smaller setup, when they're with their parent, and that one-on-one attention does play a massive role, and suddenly they are able to cope with the work that they are presented with. And also the additional support and resources that's available in terms of home education does look different from that what you would have in a normal schooling environment. We often speak about own time, own pace. What you can do in a homeschooling environment, but necessarily not in a big mainstream school, is focus on a subject a day. For some kids, being hyper-focused, it benefits them to, for the entire day, just being focused on the languages or just being focused on mathematics. Even for some of the other subjects, the subjects that requires a little bit more of a studying approach, then it could be fun for them to learn this in a completely different environment, to take them out of the house, teach them in the garden, do things differently. You can also extend the academic period slightly. I've mentioned doing subjects over more than one calendar year, but we do, up until grade 9, allow for learners to move a little bit into the new year. For example, all the academic learners of 2023, their marks only has to be entered by the end of Feb of this year. So they did have that little bit of an extended time. We provide a suggested timetable for grades R to 9. That doesn't mean that the learner needs to complete all of their work in that first term and write the first term test series on the dot at the time that it is specified. If they need to move a little bit into the typical holiday time, then that they can do that. They can work a little bit into different hours. So it's not as fixed as you will get in a typical schooling environment. I have mentioned the single subjects already. Also the flexible assessment approach. So yes, we do have the suggested timetables, but be aware of where your child is at. If they are not 100% ready to write that test paper, instead of assisting them beyond what the concession and accommodation makes room for, have them complete it on their own, but have them complete it a little later. Wait another month or two before you have them write that test or exam. Create an environment where they feel completely comfortable when they're writing. These are things that you can do at home that you can't necessarily do in a school environment. You can always reach out to our team of education specialists. The team have worked with a multitude of learners over the number of years. In many instances, we will be able to tell you these aspects of a particular subject for your learner in line with the needs for your learner could be an area that you should be focusing more on versus another area that you might just skip over. We say this to all parents, not just parents with learners with special needs, but when you see that your child has gotten a particular concept, a hold of that concept, understands the concept, move on beyond that concept and start working on something new. The CAPS curriculum is a very jam-packed curriculum, and we also provide you with a lot of additional examples that you do not necessarily have to do each and every single set of examples. Rather have a look at the tests and the examination papers that we provide you with. Know what your child is capable of and know the focus that you need to be and need to have for your child. It is a little bit different when your focus is not, for example, obtaining a grade 12 matriculation certificate, but only wanting your child to at least get to a grade 9 level. learners that wants to reach that grade 12 national senior certificate, it is super important for them to work through all of the work that's there completely on in terms of the content that's there, and all of that content, get all of that content mastered. Whereas a learner with severe special needs might have to focus on different aspects, or have them focus on those aspects in a more relaxed kind of manner and environment. The Optimi Learning Portal also extends your reach as a parent here. You can play back those videos. You can have them watch things over and over. You can pause and play in between, which really helps. And then there's all these different quizzes available as well that provides you with additional support. We also often say to parents, don't underestimate your child. We actually had a wonderful visit with learners that's get support from a tutor throughout last week, where a learner in a public school just couldn't cope, and the learner were told that they would never progress past grade 3, and that same child now is in grade 8. He just needed someone to believe in him, to mom to give a little bit more attention, a tutor to give individual attention in particular subjects. And this child does have certain learning disabilities, but he is still doing it. He might not be able to get his grade 12, but he's in grade 8 already, and he's writing his tests and exams on his own. So we often do, as parents, want to put them into that cotton wool and baby them a little bit more than what they need to. So don't underestimate them. Let them also show you where they can go, without that pressure, obviously, of expecting them to go beyond their own means. Complete the tests and exams when you know it's the best time for them. I have mentioned that already, but just reiterating that again. But this also means that up until grade 9, you have that flexibility to, if they're not feeling well today, this morning, don't let them write that test or exam. Have them write it that afternoon. Grade 10 to 11, the rules changes a lot. Grade 10 to 11 is a lot more fixed. There we have to adhere to the rules and regulations that Sakai puts forward, Sakai being the assessment body, and it's a national senior certificate qualification, or Malusi certification. So you don't have the same kind of room to move around. That's why we normally suggest completing your academic year over more than one calendar year, since you do not have the same kind of flexibility in terms of tests and exams. But grade 4 to 9, since you have that flexibility, use the flexibility with your child. One of the other suggestions we have specifically in terms of languages could be to start with an additional language in the third term, so that you don't do both of the languages simultaneously. Obviously, in terms of tests and exams, these needs to be kept in mind, because we release tests and exams at a particular time throughout the year. But it might, for certain kids, again, not every single mold is the same, but you can perhaps consider completing first the additional language and then the home language later on, but perhaps not at the same time. Or in very special circumstances, such as with the single subjects that you choose a subject that you think your child would be able to complete and focus on that subject for a year. With life skills, keep it as practical as possible. Do real life kind of interactions, make it fun for them. The subject leans itself perfectly to this. Extend your day in terms of schooling hours, working during the times that's better for your child, when you know that they have particular hours where they feel more comfortable with. If they've got a particular schedule that they feel more comfortable with, or a rhythm they feel more comfortable with, then you can allow for a little bit of flexibility in terms of this as well. Use the Optimi Learning Portal as your baseline, but also keep in mind that everything that's on OLP is not compulsory. And we often hear this from parents that they get overwhelmed with the book work and the OLP work. A lot of the additional resources on OLP is there for additional practice. So have your child practice what they can. The only compulsory set of assessments, so to speak, that a learner needs to complete to be able to progress to the next year are those assessments that's on the assessment screen. That should be your guide in terms of what is absolutely compulsory. The additional quizzes, the additional resources that's there, those are all to further support you and not as necessarily demand in terms of completing every single thing. It might become overwhelming, especially to a learner with special needs. The OLP has multiple selected subject-related videos. So go and have a look at those. Have that as an extension of your own tutoring for your child and your own facilitation. For foundation phase, we have such amazing presentations of a practical nature that you can have your kids participate in and have them find it fun. As always, you can reach out to us. You can email us, you can phone us, or you can even WhatsApp us. Join sessions such as these, and also join our Facebook pages. There's groups per faith, and for some of the FET subjects, there's subject-specific pages as well that you can join to become part of the conversation, or join any of our free webinars.